today we celebrate the Norse god Thor. A wonderful example of being strong within the mind. So let's kind of look at that and determine how we can apply those qualities to our everyday life. Before I get started, as always, I want to make sure I draw your attention to New Reality TV all day, every day, a new physical streaming channel that allows you to explore a plethora of perspectives and ideas and thoughts as to how we can change our trajectory to find a better mental space and a happier heart. I also want to draw attention to my website, NorseWhispers.com. There you will find two major pages to your attention. Firstly and foremost, NorseWhispers.com/our-friends is a collection of individuals or organizations that have supported the programs and the mission here at the Alaska Ulfhetnar. Otherwise, I ask that you take a look at my coaching opportunities for all of you who may need that extra ear to bend or extra thought process. By all means, reach out and connect. We can start a conversation and actually find something, hopefully, that will help to obtain or maintain our mental space. And as always, our proud distributors throughout the internet, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube. We want to appreciate all of those of you who have signed up, who have subscribed, liked, followed, and done all the secret handshakes. We very much appreciate it. I know I speak from my heart when I say I appreciate it, because it helps us to get the message out even further that we have the opportunity for growth. Finally, for those of you who may have some extra coins jingling around in the pocket and need to find a good way to put them to good use, by all means, drop them in our tip jar, and we can definitely use funds to help me travel to all the different locations that I do, and certainly to keep our electronic platform available as well. So lots of good ways to use those spare coins. So if you have any, drop them off. Today we're talking about the strength of Thor. Now, Thor isn't just the Marvel comics, although Chris Hemsworth, I must say, does a good job. He was far more than that. And he is today a representation of not only the physical strength that Thor needed, or that Thor has, but also the mental strength. When Thor set his mind to something, he was able to accomplish it regardless of what the obstacles were before him. This is the same mentality that you and I can use as we address those challenges in our lives that may push us in directions, may attempt to manipulate our emotional state, or may attempt to change our values and or our thought process. So we want to understand that physical strength, albeit important and healthy choices, mental strength is even more important for a multitude of reasons, and we're going to talk about that. So when we think about mental strength, it's not about doing push-ups and all those sort of things with our mind. It's about believing in our own thought process. We have to be able to think what we want to think, and then believe in that thought until it's proven inaccurate or it doesn't align with the other things in our thought process, and certainly in our mind. There are kind of three major influences when we talk about the strength of mind. The first is our intrinsic values. Yesterday, For those of you who caught the show, the morning show, we talked about the well of the self. And in the well of the self, way at the bottom, are those core values that we hold very dearly. Won't let go of them for anything. Those are could be represented by the Norse, the nine noble virtues, things like honor and courage and truthfulness and industrialness and hospitality. All of these things could be those rocks at the bottom of our well, creating the beautiful mosaic of who you are. And we'll find other values as well. Many values that may include things like harmony. I seek harmony with all people. So that rock's down there. I seek to love all people, maybe. That rock's down there. So these core values of who you are, what makes you think the way you do, feel the way you do, and believe the way you do. All of those exercises or actions are all guided by these stones at the bottom of the well of self. Now, we get to put those rocks there. We get to decide what values we have, what is important to us. Now, granted, when we are a young child and we are growing up and our mind is still developing, we're choosing our rocks. We're figuring out what's important to us, what has value in our world. So we're putting the rocks in there ourselves. We're determining that, I'm going to be truthful above all else. Put that rock in there. I'm going to care about other people's feelings. Put that rock in there. And these rocks will then establish how we think and what we believe. Most importantly, what our emotional states are. Because remember, as we interpret our reality, as our physical sensory input takes in reality, part of that process is when it gets to the brain and the brain recognizes an emotional signature, sends it down to the heart, releases hormones into the bloodstream. Those hormones are based on the DNA of who we are. So our values are very much front and center as we release these hormones into our bloodstream. Bloodstream then carries those chemicals back to the brain, where the brain recognizes it. You may remember from our recipe book within our mind of what this chemical composition is, and now what I should feel, how I'm going to remember this experience within reality. So this is what's so critical in understanding this well of self. Now, Thor knew his well. He knew each and every rock within his well. So it was easy for him to then set his mind at doing what he wanted to accomplish and believing in himself. Now, our well of self has a very tight connection to our self-worth, our self-value. When we look into the well, we should see this beautiful painting at the base of the well. Now, in many times in life, other people, other authority figures, other figures that we've allowed to have a level of authority within our mind, they will come to us and they will say, here is a rock, here is a value that I have, that I possess, and here you can have it, put it in your well. Now, in some cases, these people will try to just toss it into your well. And we know about when things are tossed into the well, the water that's between the viewer and the rocks, all that water gets all shaken up, all stirred up, and it can become cloudy, and it becomes hard to see our values, hard to see what we really believe in, right? You have these moments in our lives. Everyone does. Even I struggle to sometimes see the rocks at the bottom of my well. But, like in all things, as we allow time to settle all of this chaos, right? It all settles down and ultimately reveals the beautiful rocks at the bottom. So, the key is that yes, these values are going to come into our lives, and some of them may be filthy as they come into our well, and therefore create just an unrecognition sometimes of what our own values are. As it settles to the bottom of the well, it then kind of the dirt will eventually settle and we're left with this rock. Now, if this rock could be ugly, it could not complement the rest of our rock collection there at the bottom of the well. The good news is we have a choice. We can dive into that value, to that rock, and we can take it out. Knowing that as we pull the rock from our mind, as we pull that value and we discard it, it may make the water a little murky as we get that rock up and out of there. Okay? So in life, we may attempt to lose our values. Most often than not, what we find with values is that they can kind of either they can slip underneath the rocks that we want, kind of fall into the mud that's underneath our beautiful rocks, and just disappear. As they are, sometimes we may get additional rocks that we want to put in there, that we establish, that we uncover, and we say, I want this rock instead of that rock. I want this value instead of that value. This allows us then to take that rock out and put the new rock in. So we have that authority. This is our well. No one else has authority in this well. All right? We may afford other people, other trusted people, other authority. We've given them some level of authority. We may trust them to put their values in our well. Maybe we see a similarity and we say, I really like this person, and I respect what they're thinking, and I respect how they treat others, and all of this. And so, you know what? Okay, I'll take that rock. And we'll put it in the collection. When our brain, as I mentioned before, takes in this sensory input, processes it, sends it down to the heart for the heart to then release into hormones into the bloodstream. That release of hormones is based on this value. Okay, so these stones at the bottom of our well are going to manipulate, alter the chemical release into the bloodstream. The bloodstream, of course, is going to bring it back to the brain, and the brain then looks it up in our recipe book. Now, in this case, because we've changed the rocks at the bottom of our well, the hormones that are released into the bloodstream may be a little different, may be altered just a little bit. And they only have to be altered just a little bit. When they come back to the brain, and the brain receives it and reviews it and compares it to its recipe book, now there's not a clean match, right? Well, it's kind of happy, but not fully happy. So we'll just be okay, right? Have you had those moments? We all have, right? Moments where we're not really sure how we feel. we could be happy, maybe even content, maybe just joyful. Who knows, right? You know. You have to evaluate your rocks. You are responsible, you are accountable, and most importantly, you're the only one that can truly arrange your rocks in such a way that you recognize things, that things become natural. Now, when we are living our lives, we're interacting with all people and we're doing our thing, and we're within the well. This is referred to as the authentic space. We're living according to our values, right? And that's super important because when we do live our lives in this authentic space, we find a reduction, a natural reduction in the stresses that are in our processing unit, in our brain. And when we reduce those small stresses, we are now capable of applying cognitive thought, which is at the other end of the spectrum of this bandwidth that we have in our brain. Cognitive thought is up here, where we can then take a traumatic event, such as maybe a volatile event that we witness, and we can now use our cognitive thought process to chunk it down, to break down this overall traumatic event into manageable chunks that then we can then mentally process. So critical, because this gives us the ability to move this trauma through our processing unit onto other things. We don't get hung up as this trauma is trying to process through our processing unit here, and because we can't get it through quick enough, it essentially starts backing up traffic. Right? So the physical sensory input isn't making it to the brain because it's hung up behind this large trauma. We find this very frequently in our everyday life, right? So our brain is constantly thinking of this traumatic event that we absorbed, that we experienced, and we're trying to chew through this, right? We're trying to, but we don't have any cognitive space because we've got these little stressors that have pushed this whole trauma up into our cognitive space. We're out of cognitive space now, so we essentially have to wait for the brain to process enough of the trauma to clear up some cognitive space. Once we can clear up that cognitive space, then we're on our way. Our brain will be able to process this event, this experience. Now, at the same time, another alternative is that when we are under this high load and our trauma has captured not only the emotional bandwidth portion of the brain, but it's also taking the cognitive space as well, because we have built up these little stressors. We can do the opposite, in that we can remove these little stressors. We look at our lives, we look at why we're hanging on to it, we come back into our authentic space, we just pull everything back, we become congruent again. We're going to open up that space that the stress was. So this emotional trauma then shifts down, and now we begin to have what I call a little bit of headspace, or a little bit of cognitive thinking that we can then apply to the trauma, to the traumatic experience, and chunk it down. Manageable parts that we can then deal with. Now, Thor represents this process of understanding this whole thing. This is what he represents to me as I pray to the god Thor each and every day, that I have the ability to maintain my own mental space, that I'm able to deny that energy that would overwhelm me or that would begin to build up these stresses, knowing that should I witness something very traumatic or or experienced something very traumatic in my life, I could deal with it. If I didn't have these little stresses, my emotions would be in their space, right? And I would have some cognitive space that I could apply to that trauma and actually chunk it down and deal with it much more effectively. So these small stresses can be taken out in, we'll use the term, in real time as we're going along and we're dealing with this trauma and we're saying, man, I'm just so overwhelmed. I can then begin to strip away, come back to my authentic space, which is the natural body's reaction. If you notice, if we accept a trauma and it's just overwhelming us, right? But we have these little stresses because we're not living authentically. We're playing a role to be part of some society, some community, right? And so we're playing that role, and that role is leading to a level of stress that's taking up our bandwidth. But then this trauma hits us, and we're just blown away. And a lot of people will become more authentic. So if it's a very sad or upsetting type of experience that we have, and that affects us, and we've been living outside the mean, all of a sudden, as we are responding, well, in this case, we're going to be reacting to this event, this traumatic event. Notice how we become more authentic. We don't care who sees us cry. We don't care who sees us sad, angry, or frustrated, or nothing. We all of a sudden, all of that stuff doesn't matter. Why? Because the brain is saying, you know what, I need this space. Away you go. Shoo shoo. You're going to live, you're going to be authentic for the next, however long it takes me to figure out this trauma. Right? And that's what many people experience as they go through a very large traumatic event, is they're going to become authentic. Why? Because that's the natural body. That's the natural state of existence, is to be authentic, to live according to what's in the bottom of our well. Okay? So this is really kind of a breakdown, a very micro breakdown of how you interpret our feelings, and more importantly, how we can control our mental state, our mental wheelhouse, right? Our ability to either obtain or maintain our mental space. So critical, particularly in these modern day times, where we have a lot of these little stressors, not as much because we're not living authentically by our own design, but by maybe the community at which we live is pushing us to live outside of our authentic space. Either way, that space is now taken up with being out of alignment with our authentic self. And when we live that way, when we function that way, we find that these traumatic events, very much like my brothers and sisters who are not living authentically, they're in the military, they're far from home, they're out of their space. But then they have an experience that is super traumatic. That's just over the top traumatic. And all of a sudden, they don't have a cognitive space. They're back to their authentic selves because they're crushed under this trauma. And so it is by us looking at them and helping them to recognize this space that they've essentially blocked off for being outside their delta, or creating a delta by being outside their authentic self. And that creates a stress within the mind, even if we don't think it does. Even if, man, I really feel great hanging out with my friends and being cool and doing this and that and the other thing. If it's not your authentic self, it creates stress. It creates a division within the mind. Okay? You may feel really good about it. It may not bother you at all to be outside your authentic space, but know that it is using up some of your bandwidth. When or if, hopefully if, you experience some emotional trauma, very large, and that comes into our brain, we're going to find where that little bit of stress down here is going to it's going to minimize our effective processing of that trauma, right? So just be cognizant, be thoughtful, say, am I being authentic? How do you know you're authentic? What are your values? This is where we have to look inside of ourselves and see what's in our well. There have been many people throughout your life, particularly as we grow up, whom the brain assigns this level of authority that allows them to throw values into our well. Our parents, or maybe grandparents, teachers, good, adult friends when we're young. I mean, maybe your uncles or aunts or older cousins. All of these folks have a level of authority in your mind, right? Now, don't kid yourself. If you have an uncle whom, don't listen to anything Uncle Bob or Uncle Ron or Uncle Todd or Uncle whoever says. Chances are it has everything to do with, maybe drinking and the things that we don't want in our life, right? Because that's the kind of behaviors that uncles, or that uncle anyway, takes. Now, when you consider then removing him from your authority figure list, think of, for those of us who were involved in the church, what are their values? What are their values that the church passed through the generations before you into your, say, your mom and dad? What were some of those values? Many times, many of our values are put there. We may not even know they're there. We may not even know that that's important. And so it's always a good thing to take inventory. All right? I wish you the best Thursday, and we will see you again tomorrow as we celebrate the energy of Freya. Thank you, my friends. Love and light.